Joining us in the studio is strategy consultant and public affairs analyst Dikbo Uyewole. Thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast. Good morning.
Good morning.
What does the total border closure mean for Nigeria's economy?
Well, definitely it would hurt us a lot, because I find it quite amusing that a country that we're complaining that we're broke is closing off their land borders. Now, if you're saying you're trying to curb smuggling, I don't believe that you need to throw the baby away with the bathwater.
Indeed.
So if we're saying that people are smuggling goods through the borders, how about we police the borders a lot more sternly?
But the government is concerned about security, talking about the fact that aliens come into the country and perpetrate heinous crimes and get back, and of course illegal goods are brought in that are not supposed to be in Nigeria. That's the concern of the federal government.
Exactly. So now it's a two-pronged approach: security and illegal goods. With regards to security, I'm sure they know the parts of the country where they need to tighten up the borders, right? And with regards to smuggling, they know the other parts as well. Now, with regards to security, of course, we really can't say that the government should compromise on security, okay? Now, they really do need to do that. But in the place where it involves commerce, and you have to close off a proper, legitimate land channel of commerce between our nation and other nations on the continent, I think it is quite questionable, because there are a lot of legitimate business owners that ply their trade along that route.
Absolutely.
Yes, so now what is the impact on them? Now, we just saw now that they've been able to seize over ₦1 billion in smuggled goods. Now, have we been able to account for the number of legitimate businesses that are losing money on a daily basis? We don't have those numbers. Because if you weigh them against each other, you find out that it's really hurting the economy more. Because we cannot be complaining that we are broke as a nation and then we're saying we can't export goods.
But the government has also said that when it comes to the aspect of smuggling of petroleum, we have seen that that has, reduced, so to speak. And then the farmers are somehow benefiting from this closure of borders, in terms of they are now able to have, there's an increase from about 500,000 tons to 700,000 now. But then that hasn't closed up the capacity of the consumption that we are looking at. How about those? When you weigh those, doesn't it take time to, all of the economic benefits? Wouldn't it take time for us to begin to see it yield results, this closure of borders?
Yes, well, eventually, but I would like to approach this from a perspective of sustainability. Now, how sustainable is it to close the land borders, and for how long are we going to do that? How about we open it up partially, police it a lot more, and ensure that the goods that are getting in are legal goods without affecting the local production? That's a strategy. But saying that you're closing everything off, it is not just feasible. So we can't, like I said, we can't keep complaining we're broke, and then we start to have these policies that are not consistent with nations that are trying to grow their economy. It doesn't work that way. So the federal government needs to do better with regards to their policies. I mean, saying that you're closing off your land borders, that is a proper channel between our nation and other West African nations. Okay?
And these nations have been complaining that
yes,
the ECOWAS protocol is not being
followed.
Yeah,
and then we also
Africa Free Trade Agreement,
yes,
and how this is impacting it as well.
How it's impacting them. And I mean, I think it's quite unfair, really, to our local business owners and to our partners across the border, just saying that, okay, you're just closing up the borders without notice, without anything like that. I mean, so people need to be able to prepare themselves for the shock that it's going to come.
So despite this closure, isn't it the time for us to look inwards and develop ourselves with what we have? Like the president has always said, let us farm, or let us produce what we eat.
That's a fantastic idea. But this is where the challenge is with this border closure strategy. If we're going to do that, closing the border off in the last 1 month, okay? There's been total closure now for some days. We are not going to be able to produce everything we will need within the short period of time. How about we wean ourselves off it gradually? It's the same thing with devaluation, saying that we want to devalue our currency to discourage imports and encourage exports. You don't just jack import taxes up from 10% to 75%, saying that you want to win. You have to win people off gradually, which is something that historically the government have been able to do, because they just come and say, okay, you know what, we're increasing this tax from 40% to 75% so that it's too expensive for you to do. But in the real sense of it, The local alternatives need time to grow themselves with production, with sales, and all of that to be able to cater for the local economy.
All right. Dikbo Oyewole, thank you for your time on TVC Breakfast.
Thank you for having me.
Well, joining us in the studio is strategy consultant and public affairs analyst Dikbo Oyewole. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Now, let's look at how this border closure impacts on the relationship with other African countries, because there has been some arguments that under this move by the government lies some sort of economic malice. That's why the president has been so firm, because the president has said that the countries around our borders are not doing enough to tackle issues of smuggling. Okay,
well, the government will say that, but I believe that we have the primary responsibility of being in charge of our security and our economy. Now, saying that other countries aren't doing enough to tackle smuggling with regards to your country, I'm not sure. I'm not sure where that's coming from.
It's supposed to be a relationship. Both countries come together to tackle issues like smuggling, insecurity, insurgency, and the likes.
Well, yes, that agreement is there, and it's a relation. It's supposed to be a symbiotic relationship. Okay, it's not supposed to be one way, but it will be on what basis to say that they're not tackling smuggling, because it's supposed to be a two-way street. Okay, if you're saying things are coming from the other side, how come they are getting in through here? Why aren't they sent back? Okay, it's unfortunately it's a conversation around demand and supply. How be it illegal.
If there is no market here?
If there's no market here, there won't be
an influx.
Yes, so I think it's something we need to look at on both sides of it. Not saying that, okay, you stop selling to me illegal or knockoff wristwatches. If I'm not buying knockoff wristwatches from you, you won't have a market to sell it to me.
Okay. Because the issues, all of these issues before the border was closed, there were talks that perhaps the president could have entered into a conversation with the presidents of these countries before making this decision, which we didn't see until we are getting this reaction.
Exactly, which would automatically have been the natural diplomatic response I would have expected from the president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, because I think that by virtue of pride of place that we hold on the continent, it wouldn't be too much for the president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria to call on the presidents of other neighboring nations to say that, okay, you know what, we're having this challenge, what are we doing about it? And if consistently it's been shown that nothing has been done about it, you give them certain ultimatums, make sure there are economic sanctions for it.
All right, so we have several manned borders, excuse me, and we have several or more than a lot of unmanned borders.
A lot,
about
hundreds.
1,900.
Yes. So what do we do about this unmanned? Because if you go to places like Semiboda or Idiroko, you see that everywhere is secured.
Yes.
But in between all of those
there are pockets of unmanned borders.
Unmanned borders, and you see individuals, bike riders going through those borders, smuggling things in. What can we do about those?
Well, I believe that the government has certain agencies charged with securing our borders, okay? We have the customs, we have the immigrations, and folks like that.
Do we have the men on ground? Do we have enough?
Capacity.
The capacity to
Okay, well, addressing the capacity is something I'm not sure we have. But that being said, I mean, we just confirmed that we have over 1,000 unmanned borders. Aren't those places where they should focus their energy on securing? Because those are the actual serious hubs for smuggling, not the manned borders.
So
where people have legitimate
this is
businesses
encouraging smuggling. All of this, the closure of the manned borders is encouraging smuggling through other channels. Is that what you're saying?
Not necessarily, but invariably so. Okay. Because before the borders were closed, okay, these unmanned borders had existed, and they were primarily used for smuggling. Okay, so now that the legitimate borders are closed, the manned borders are closed, of course there'll be a lot more traffic on that side. So the question is, what's the government doing about it? Shouldn't they have those places manned to ensure that the actual objective for closing the borders that is also affecting legitimate businesses is actually achieved? Because if you're saying that we're closing the manned borders and we have legitimate business owners being affected, but we have the unmanned ones and they are left unmanned still, and we have a lot of smuggling coming in through those routes, I think that it's a bit counterproductive. So those are the places where the government should really focus their energy on, and not the land borders where legitimate commerce is flowing through.
Well, Dikbo Oyewole, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having
TVC
me.
Breakfast. Joining us in the studio is strategy consultant and public affairs analyst Dikbo Oyewole. Thank you for joining us in TVC Breakfast. Now, there are talks about several gains made from this border closure, like we have read out.
Yes.
But another aspect is our capacity to, close the gaps for all of the deficits and the impact that the border closure has exposed us to because of the price increase in food items, increase in so many things. How can our farmers and all of those who were perhaps involved in legitimate businesses around the borders, tap into this and make good advantage of the border closure at this point, seeing that the government is saying this border closure will take a long while?
Okay, well, alternatively, they might have to look to servicing local markets as opposed to exporting their goods. But from a business standpoint, that may not be a lot more profitable for some, because some businesses have the business model built around exportation. Okay, so having to sell your goods locally may not really work for them, but it may be a difficult adjustment they might have to make.
Okay. All right, so for businessmen and everyone who imports goods in Nigeria, what lessons can we learn from this?
Okay, well, for us as a people, looking at local alternatives would be the end game. But like I always say to people, this border closure is a bit short-sighted because people weren't wind of it. It was just yanked off all at once. And as we all know, local alternatives aren't readily available to service every single Nigerian.
And when available, expensive.
And when available, expensive. And especially now with the border closure, there's a lot of hike in price, there's a lot of exploitation. But as it is, it's a free market, okay? And people do need to respond to it the way it is. And that also goes to say that we don't have a lot of local alternatives as the government claims we do have. Because if there's a lot of competition in a particular industry, okay? For example, we're all selling this mug. I can't sell my mug at 250 when you're selling yours at 100 naira and selling yours at 100 naira. I know there's a competition, so my price has to be competitive. But it's when there isn't enough competition, then I get to exploit people, I increase the prices haphazardly, and we get to see the things we're seeing right now. So I think this in itself should be one of the indicators that should let the government know that the local alternatives we're talking about, we aren't there yet, we're on our way.
But perhaps in the long run, we might get there.
Yes, hopefully. But I would have expected the government to have like a 6 to 18 month plan with the gradual closure of the border and saying, okay, from this time to this time, this amount of goods can come in, these can go out, so that we can win people off it. That has always been my stance for it. We need to win people off things and not just yank them off them.
All right, there's this aspect, because initially the government talked about issues of checking issues of insecurity. And now some persons have argued that perhaps the question should be, we should beam our searchlight into the immigration service, how effective they have been, and not just shut down the borders.
Okay, yes. Well, with the immigration service, I believe that it is true that our land borders have quite been very porous, really, because we find a lot of people who come from various parts of the continent and come in. We don't know if they come in legally or not, okay? But that's a question for the immigration services to answer. But knowing how porous our borders are, to be able to smuggle in goods like bags of rice, PMS, vehicles, how hard is it for a human being to walk across the border or to come in one of those vehicles that smuggles in these items? So I think that the immigration service and the customs, they need to work together and get the job done. When we say get the job done, do the work that you have actually been called to do and not just make things uncomfortable for people.
All right, Dikbo Oyewole, thank you for your time on TVC Breakfast.